Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in the private memoirs and confessions of a justified sinner by James Hogg. And with that, I'll get started. About this time it was that my worthy and reverend parent came with one of his elders to see my mother and myself. His presence always brought joy with it into our family, for my mother was uplifted, and I had so few who cared for me, or for whom I cared, that I felt rather gratified at seeing him. My illustrious friend was also much more attached to him than any other person, except myself, for their religious principles tallied in every point, and their conversation was interesting, serious, and sublime. Being anxious to entertain well and highly the man to whom I had been so much indebted, and knowing that with all his integrity and righteousness he disdained not the good things of this life, I brought him to the late laird's well-stored cellars, various fragrant and salubrious wines, and we drank and became merry, and I found that my miseries and overpowering calamities passed away over my head like a shower that is driven by the wind. I became elevated and happy, and welcomed my guests 100 times. And then I joined them in religious conversation with a zeal and enthusiasm which I had not often experienced, and which made all their hearts rejoice, so that I said to myself, "Surely every gift of God is a blessing, and ought to be used with liberality and thankfulness." The next day I wakened from a profound and feverish sleep and called for something to drink. There was a servant answered, whom I had never seen before, and he was clad in my servant's clothes and livery. I asked for Andrew Handyside, the servant who had waited at table the night before, but the man answered with a stare and a smile. "What do you mean, sirrah?" said I. "Pray, what do you do here? Or what are you pleased to laugh at? I desire you to go about your business and send me up Handyside. I want him to bring me something to drink." "Ye sanna want to drink, master," said the fellow. "Take a hearty ane, and see if it will waken up ye something. Say that ye dinna care for ghaist through your sleep. Surely ye hanna forgotten that Andrew Handyside has been in his grave these 6 months." This was a stunning blow to me. I could not answer farther, but sunk back on my pillow as if I had been a lump of lead, refusing to take a drink or anything else at the fellow's hand, who seemed thus mocking me with so grave a face. The man seemed sorry, and I grieved at my being offended, but I ordered him away and continued sullen and thoughtful. Could I have again been for a season in utter oblivion to myself, and transacting business which I neither approved of, nor had any connection with? I tried to recollect something in which I might have been engaged, but nothing was portrayed on my mind subsequent to the parting with my friends at a late hour the evening before. The evening before it certainly was. But if so, how came it that Andrew Handyside, who served at table that evening, should have been in his grave 6 months? This was a circumstance somewhat equivocal. Therefore, being afraid to arise, lest accusations of I knew not what might come against me, I was obliged to call once more in order to come at what intelligence I could. The same fellow appeared to receive my orders as before, and I set about examining him with regard to particulars. He told me his name was Scrape, that I hired him myself, of whom I hired him, and at whose recommendation. I smiled and nodded so as to let the knave see I understood he was telling me a chain of falsehoods, but did not choose to begin with any violent asseverations to the contrary. "And where is my noble friend and companion?" said I. "How has he been engaged in the interim?" "I dinna ken him, sir," said Scrape, "but have heard it said that the strange mysterious person that attended you, him that the maist part of folks counted uncanny, had gone away with Mr. Ringan o' Glasgow last year, and had never returned." I thanked the Lord in my heart for his intelligence, hoping that the illustrious stranger had returned to his own land and people, and that I should thenceforth be rid of his controlling and appalling presence. "And where is my mother?" said I. The man's breath cut short, and he looked at me without returning any answer. "I ask you where my mother is," said I. "God only knows, and not I, where she is," returned he. "He knows where her soul is, and as for her body, if you dinna ken something o' it, I suppose nae man alive does." "What do you mean, you knave?" said I. "What dark hints are these you are throwing out? Tell me precisely and distinctly what you know of my mother." "It is uncoquero ye to forget, or pretend to forget everything that gate that day, sir," said he. "I'm sure you heard enough about it yester'n, and I can tell you there are some gay and ill-farred stories gone about that business. But as the thing is to be tried afore the circuit lords, it would be far wrang to say either this or that to influence the public mind. It is best just to let justice take its way. I had nothing to say, sir. Ye have been a good enough master to me, and paid my wages regularly, but ye have muckle need to be innocent, for there are some heavy accusations rising against you." "I fear no accusations of man," said I, "as long as I can justify my cause in the sight of heaven, and that I can do this I am well aware. Go you and bring me some wine and water, and some other clothes than these gaudy and glaring ones." I took a cup of wine and water, put on my black clothes, and walked out. For all the perplexity that surrounded me, I felt my spirits considerably buoyant. It appeared that I was rid of the two greatest bars to my happiness, by what agency I knew not. My mother, it seemed, was gone, who had become a grievous thorn in my side of late, and my great companion and counselor, who tyrannized over every spontaneous movement of my heart, had likewise taken himself off. This last was an unspeakable relief, for I found that for a long season I had only been able to act by the motions of his mysterious mind and spirit. I therefore thanked God for my deliverance, and strode through my woods with a daring and heroic step, with independence in my eye and freedom swinging in my right hand. At the extremity of the Colwyn wood I perceived a figure approaching me with slow and dignified motion. The moment that I beheld it, my whole frame received a shock, as if the ground on which I walked had sunk suddenly below me. Yet at that moment I knew not who it was. It was the air and motion of someone that I dreaded, and from whom I would gladly have escaped. But this I even had not power to attempt. It came slowly onward, and I advanced as slowly to meet it. Yet when we came within speech, I still knew not who it was. It bore the figure, air, and features of my late brother. I thought, exactly. Yet in all these there were traits so forbidding, so mixed with an appearance of misery, chagrin, and despair, that I still shrunk from the view, not knowing on whose face I looked. But when the being spoke, both my mental and bodily frame received another shock more terrible than the first, for it was the voice of the great personage I had so long denominated my friend, of whom I had deemed myself for ever freed, in whose presence and counsels I now dreaded more than hell. It was his voice, but so altered, I shall never forget it till my dying day. Nay, I can scarce conceive it possible that any earthly sounds could be so discordant, so repulsive to every feeling of a human soul, as the tones of the voice that grated on my ear at that moment. They were the sounds of the pit, wheezed through a grated cranny, or seemed so to my distempered imagination. "So, thou shudderest at my approach now, dost thou?" said he. "Is this all the gratitude that you deign for an attachment of which the annals of the world furnish no parallel? An attachment which has caused me to forego power and dominion, might, homage, conquest, and adulation, all that I might gain one highly valued and sanctified spirit to my great and true principles of reformation among mankind. Wherein have I offended? What have I done for evil, or that I may not have done for your good, that you would thus shun my presence?" "Great and magnificent prince," said I humbly, "let me request of you to abandon a poor worthless wight to his own wayward fortune, and return to the dominion of your people. I am unworthy of the sacrifices you have made for my sake, and after all your efforts, I do not feel that you have rendered me either more virtuous or more happy. For the sake of that which is estimable in human nature, depart from me to your own home, before you render me a being either altogether above or below the rest of my fellow creatures. Let me plod on towards heaven and happiness in my own way, like those that have gone before me, and I promise to stick fast by the great principles which you have so strenuously inculcated, on condition that you depart and leave me forever." "Sooner shall you make the mother abandon the child of her bosom, nay, sooner cause the shadow to relinquish the substance, than separate me from your side. Our beings are amalgamated, as it were, and consociated in one, and never shall I depart from this country until I can carry you in triumph with me." I can in no wise describe the effect this appalling speech had on me. It was like the announcement of death to one who had late deemed himself free, if not of something worse than death, and of longer continuance. There was I doomed to remain in misery, subjugated, soul and body, to one whose presence was become more intolerable to me than aught on earth could compensate. And at that moment, when he beheld the anguish of my soul, he could not conceal that he enjoyed it. I was troubled for an answer for which he was waiting. It became incumbent on me to say something after such a protestation of attachment, and in some degree to shake the validity of it, I asked with great simplicity where he had been all this while. "Your crimes and your extravagancies forced me from your side for a season," said he, "but now that I hope that day of grace is returned, I am again drawn towards you by an affection that has neither bounds nor interest, an affection for which I received not even the poor return of gratitude, in which it seems to have its radical sources in fascination. I have been far, far abroad, and have seen much, and transacted much, since I last spoke with you. During that space, I grievously suspected that you had been guilty of great crimes and misdemeanors, crimes that would have sunk an unregenerated person to perdition. But as I knew it to be only a temporary falling off, a specimen of that liberty by which the chosen and elected ones are made free, I closed my eyes on the wilful debasement of our principles, knowing that the transgressions could never be accounted to your charge, and that in good time you would come to your senses and throw the whole weight of your crimes on the shoulders that had voluntarily stooped to receive the load." "Certainly I will," said I, "as I and all the justified have a good right to do. But what crimes, what misdemeanors and transgressions do you talk about? For my part, I am conscious of none, and am utterly amazed at insinuations which I do not comprehend." "You have certainly been left to yourself for a season," returned he, "having gone on rather like a person in delirium than a Christian in his sober senses. You are accused of having made away with your mother privately, as also of the death of a beautiful young lady whose affections you had seduced." "It is an intolerable and monstrous falsehood," cried I, interrupting him. "I never laid a hand on a woman to take away her life, and have even shunned their society from my childhood. I know nothing of my mother's exit, nor of that young lady's whom you mention. Nothing whatever." "I hope it is so," said he. "But it seems there are some strong, presumptuous proofs against you, and I came to warn you this day that a precognition is in progress, and that unless you are perfectly convinced, not only of your innocence, but of your ability to prove it, it will be the safest course for you to abscond and let the trial go on without you." "Never shall it be said that I shrunk from such a trial as this," said I. "It would give grounds for suspicions of guilt that have never existence, even in thought. I will go and show myself in every public place, that no slanderous tongue may wag against me. I have shed the blood of sinners, but of these deaths I am guiltless. Therefore I will face every tribunal, and put all my accusers down." "Asseveration will avail you but little," answered he, composedly. "It is, however, justifiable in its place, although to me it signifies nothing, who knows too well what you did commit, both crimes in your own person and with your own hands. Far be it from me to betray you. Indeed, I would rather endeavor to palliate the offenses, for though the adverse nature, I can prove them not to be so to the cause of pure Christianity by the motive which we have approved of it, and which we wish to promulgate." "If this that you tell me to be true," said I, "then is it as true that I have two souls which take possession of my bodily frame by turns, the one being all unconscious of what the other performs. For as sure as I have at this moment a spirit within me, fashioned and destined to eternal felicity, as sure as I am utterly ignorant of the crimes you now lay to my charge." "Your supposition may be true in effect," said he. "We are all subjected to two distinct natures in the same person. I myself have suffered grievously in that way. The spirit that now directs my energies is not that which I was endowed at my creation. It is changed within me, and so is my whole nature. My former days were those of grandeur and felicity. But would you believe it? I was not then a Christian. Now I am. I have been converted to its truths by passing through the fire, and since my final conversion, my misery has been extreme. You complain that I have not been able to render you more happy than you were. Alas, do you expect it in the difficult and exterminating career which you have begun? I, however, promise you this, a portion of the only happiness which I enjoy, sublime in its motions and splendid in its attainments, I will place you on the right hand of my throne, and show you the grandeur of my domains and the felicity of my millions of true professors. I was once more humbled before this mighty potentate, and promised to be ruled wholly by his directions, although at that moment my nature shrunk from the concessions, and my soul longed rather to be enclosed in the deeps of the sea, or involved once more in utter oblivion. I was like Daniel in the den of lions, without his faith in divine support, and wholly at their mercy. I felt as one round whose body a deadly snake is twisted, which continues to hold him in its fangs without injuring him, farther than in moving its scaly infernal folds with exulting delight, to let its victim feel to whose power he has subjected itself. And thus did I for a space drag an existence from day to day in utter weariness and helplessness. At one time worshipping with great fervor of spirit, and at other times so wholly left to myself as to work all manner of vices and follies with greediness. In these my enlightened friend never accompanied me, but I always observed that he was the first to lead me to every one of them, and then leave me in the lurch. The next day after these my fallings off, he never failed to reprove me gently, blaming me for my venial transgressions. But then he had the art of reconciling all, by reverting to my justified and infallible state, which I found to prove a delightful healing salve for every sore. But of all my troubles, this was the chief. I was every day and every hour assailed with accusations of deeds of which I was wholly ignorant, of acts of cruelty, injustice, defamation, and deceit, of pieces of business which I could not be made to comprehend, with lawsuits, details, arrests of judgment, and 1,000 interminable quibbles from the mouth of my loquacious and conceited attorney. So miserable was my life rendered by these continued attacks that I was often obliged to lock myself up for days together, never seeing any person save my man Samuel Scrape, who was a very honest, blunt fellow, a staunch Cameronian, but withal very little conversant in religious matters. He said he came from a place called Penpunt, which I thought a name so ludicrous that I called him by the name of his native village, an appellation of which he was very proud, and answered everything with more civility and perspicuity when I denominated him Penput than Samuel, his own Christian name. Of this peasant was I obliged to make a companion on sundry occasions, and strange indeed were the details which he gave me concerning myself, and the ideas of the country people concerning me. I took down a few of these in writing to put off the time, here and there leave them on record, to show the best and greatest actions are misconstrued among sinful and ignorant men. You say, Samuel, that I hired you myself, that I have been a good enough master to you, and have paid you your weekly wages punctually. Now, how is it that you say this, knowing as you do that I never hired you, and never paid you a sixpence of wages in the whole course of my life, excepting this last month? Ye may as well say, master, that water's no water, or that stains are no stains. But that's just your gait, and it is a great pity you to do a thing and profess the clean contraire. Well then, since you haven't paid me own wages, and I can prove day and date when I was hired and came to your service, will you be so kind as to pay me now? That's the best way of curing a man, or the mortal disease or leasing, making that I kenno. I should think that Penput and Cameronian principles would not admit of a man taking twice payment for the same article. In such a case as this, sir, it disna hinge upon principles, but a piece of good manners, and I can tell you that at sic a crisis a Cameronian is a gay well-bred man. He's driven to this that he maun either make a breach in his fellow's good name or in his purse. And, oh, sir, whilk o' they think you the most precious? For instance, on a Galloway drover had come down to a Penput and said to a Cameronian, the folks are Cameronians there. Sir, I want to buy your cow. Very well, says the Cameronian. I just want to sell the cow. Say, give me 20 pounds, Scots, and take her with ye. It's a bargain. The drover takes away the cow and gives the Cameronian his 20 pounds Scots. But after that he meets him again on the white sands among the drovers and dealers of the land, and the Galloway man, he says to the Cameronian, afore they witnesses, Come, Master Wigham, I had never paid you for yon bit useless cow than I bought. I'll pay her the day, but you may mind the lucky penny. There's muckle need for it, or something to that purpose. The Cameronian then turns out to be a civil man, and can abide to make the man bathe or feel a liar at the same time afore his associates, and therefore he pits his principles off at the side to be a kind o' sleeping partner, as it were, and brings up his good breeding to stand at the counter. He pockets the money, gies the Galloway drover time o' day, and comes his way. And who's to blame? Man, mind yourself is the first commandment. A Cameronian's principles never came between him and a purse, nor Senna in the present case. Or as I can abide and make you out a liar, I'll thank you for my wages. Well, you shall have them, Samuel, if you declare to me that I hired you myself in this same person, and bargained with you with this same tongue and voice with which I speak to you just now. That I do declare, unless ye have two persons of the same appearance, or two tongues to the same voice. But, odds save us, sir, do you ken what the wives or the chaglins say about you? How should I, when no one repeats it to me? Oh, I trow it's a stuff. Folk should heed what's said od crazy kimmers. But there's some of them will ken for witches too, and they say, Lord, have care of us. They say the devil's often seen gone side you for sideway, whiles in a shape, and whiles in another. And they say that he whiles take your shape, or else enters into you, and then you turn a devil yourself. I was so astounded at this terrible idea that had gone abroad regarding my fellowship with the prince, or darkness, that I could make no answer to the fellow's information, but sat like one in a stupor. And if it had not been for my well-founded faith, and conviction that I was a chosen and elected one before the world was made, I should at that moment have given into the popular belief, and fallen into the sin of despondency. But I was preserved from such a fatal error by an inward and unseen supporter. Still, the insinuation was so like what I felt that I was greatly awed and confounded. The poor fellow observed this, and tried to do away the impression by some farther sage remarks of his own. Oh dear, sir, it's a balderdash, there nae doubt it. It is the crown head of absurdity to take in the havers old wives for gospel. I told them that my master was a pious man, and a sensible man, and for praying that he could ding old Macmillan himself. Sae could the devil, they said, when he like it, either at preaching or praying, if these war to answer his ain ends. Na, says I, but he's a strict believer in the truths of Christianity, my master. They said, say was Satan, for that he was the firmest believer in all the truths of Christianity that was out of heaven, and that sin the revolution that the gospel had turned so rife that he had been often driven to the shift of preaching it himself, for the purpose of getting some wang tenets introduced into it, and thereby turning it into blasphemy and ridicule. I confess to my shame that I was so overcome by this jumble of nonsense that a chillness came over me, and in spite of all my efforts to shake off the impression it had made, I fell into a faint. Samuel soon brought me to myself, and after a deep draught of wine and water, I was greatly revived, and felt my spirit rise above the sphere of vulgar conceptions, and the restrained views of unregenerate men. The shrewd but loquacious fellow, perceiving this, tried to make some amends for the pain he had occasioned to me by the following story, which I noted down, and which was brought on by a conversation to the following purport. Now, Pinfoot, you may tell me all that passed between you and the wives of the Clachan. I am better of that stomach qualm of which I am sometimes seized, and shall be much amused by hearing the sentiments of noted witches regarding myself and my connections. Well, you see, sir, I says to one of them, it will be long afore the devil intermeddle with so serious a professor, and as fervent a prayer as my master, for gin he gets the upper hand of the sickened men, was to be safe. And what ye think they said, sir? There was a lucky shawl set up her long lantern shafts, and answered me, and the rest shunned and nodded in assent on approbation. "Ye silly sotchless Cameronian quoof," quoth she, "is that ye ken about the wiles and doings o' the prince or the heir that rules and works in the bairns of disobedience? Gin ever he observes a proud professor, who has made than ordinary pretensions to a divine calling, and that rears and prays till the very howlets learn his preambles, that's the man auld Simmy fixes on to make a disclout. Oh, he canna get rest in hell if he sees a man or set of men o' this stamp, and when he sets fairly to work, it is seldom that he disna bring them round to his own measures, by hook or by crook. Then, oh, it is a grand prize for him, and a proud devil he is, when he gangs him to his own hay, which batch the souls of the 6 strenuous professors on his back. I trow old Inglesby and Liverpool packman never came up to Glasgow Street with prouder pomp, when he had 10 horses laid afore him of Flanders lace and Holland lawn, and silks and satins frae the Eastern Indians, than Satan would strodge to hell with the pack laden of the souls of proud professors on his braid shoulders. Ha ha! I think I see how the old thief would be gone through his gizzen dominions, crying his wares in derision. Why, we'll buy him a fresh collar divine, a boozy bishop, a fasting zealot, or a piping priest. For and then there's prayers, their praise, their amuses and their penances, their whinings, their howlings, their rantings, and their ravings. Here they come at last. Behold the end. Here go the rare and precious wares. A fat professor for a bodle, and a lean for a half-merk. I declare I trembled at the old hag's ravings, but the lave of the Kimmers applauded the sayings of the sacred truths. And then Lucky went on. There are many wolves in sheep's clothing among us, my man. Money deals enough the masks of zealous professors, roaming about in the kirks and meeting-houses of the land. It was but the year afore the last the people of the town of Ochtermuchty grew so religiously righteous that the meanest hind among them became a shining light in their towns and parishes. There was not to be heard neither night or day but the preaching, praying, augmentation, and catechizing in the famous town of Ochtermuchty. The young men wooed their sweethearts out of the Song of Solomon's, and the girls returned answers in strings of verses out of the Psalms. At the Lent swinglings they said questions round, and read chapters and sang hymns at bridals auld, and young prayed in their dreams, and prophesied in their sleep, till the devils in the fairest nooks of hell were alarmed and moved to commotion. Gin had it been an old carle, Robin Ruthven, Ochtermuchty would at that time he had been ruined and lost forever. But Robin was a cunning man, and had rather may wits than his own, and he had been in the hands of the fairies when he was very young. And a kinds of spirits were visible to his ain in their language as familiar to him as ain't mother tongue. Robin was sitting on the west side of West Lomond, a still gloomy night in September, when he saw a bridle of Corby crawls coming east the lift just on the edge of the gloaming. The moment that Robin saw them, he kenned by their movements that they were crawls of some other world than this. He signed himself a crap into the middle of this burrock. The Corby crawls came and sat down round about him, and they poked their black sooty wings, and spread them out to the breeze to cool. And Robin heard a Corby speaking, and another answering him, and the 10 said to the tither, Where will the ravens find a prey the night? On the lean crazy souls of Ochtermuchty, quoth the tither. I fear I will be o'erweel wrapped up in the warm flannins of faith, and clouded with the dirty duds of repentance for us to make a meal of quo the first. What in vile sounds are these that I hear coming bumming up the hill? Oh, these are the hymns and praises of the old wives and creeshy loons of Ochtermuchty, who are gone crooning their way to heaven, and gin it warna for the shame of being beat, we might let our great enemy take 'em, for such a prize as he will have. Heaven, forsooth! What shall we think of heaven if it is to be filled with vermin like they, among whom there is mair poverty and pollution than I can name? No matter for that, said the first, we cannot have our power set at defiance. Though we should put 'em in the thief's hole, we must catch them, and catch them with their own bait too. Come all to church tomorrow, and I'll let you hear how I'll gull the saints of Ochtermuchty. In the meantime there is a feast on the Sidlaw Hills tonight, below the hills of Macbeth. Mount, Diabolus, and fly. Then, with a loud croaking and crowing, the bridle of Corby's again scaled the dusky air, and left Robin Ruthven in the middle of his cairn. The next day the congregation met in the kirk of the Auchtermuchty, but the minister made not his appearance. The elders ran out and in, making inquiries, but they could learn nothing save that the minister was missing. They ordered the clerk to sing part of the 119th Psalm until they saw if the minister would cast up. The clerk did as he was ordered, and by the time he reached the 77th verse, a strange divine entered the church by the western door and advanced solemnly up to the pulpit. The eyes of all the congregation were riveted on the sublime stranger, who was clothed in a robe of black sackcloth that flowed all around him, and trailed far behind, and they winged him an angel come to exhort them in disguise. He read out his text from the prophecies of Ezekiel, which consisted of these singular words, I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he come, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. From these words he preached such a sermon as never was heard by human ears, at least never by ears of Auchtermuchty. It was a true sterling gospel sermon. It was striking, sublime, and awful in the extreme. He finally made out the it mentioned in the text to mean, properly and positively, the notable town of Auchtermuchty. He proved all the people in it to their perfect satisfaction to be in the gall of bitterness and the bond of iniquity, and he assured them that God would overturn them, their principles and professions, and that they should be no more until the devil, the town's greatest enemy, came, and then it should be given unto him for a prey, for it was his right, and to him it belonged, if there was not forthwith a radical change made in all their opinions and modes of worship. The inhabitants of Auchtermuchty were electrified. They were charmed. They were actually raving mad about the grand and sublime truths delivered to them by this eloquent and impressive preacher of Christianity. He is a prophet of the Lord, said one, sent to warn us as Jonah was sent to the Ninevites. Oh, he is an angel sent from heaven to instruct this great city, said another, for no man had ever uttered truth so sublime before. The good old people of Auchtermuchty were in perfect raptures with the preacher who had thus sent them to hell by the slump, tag, rag, and bobtail. Nothing in the world delights a truly religious people so much as consigning them to eternal damnation. They wondered after the preacher. They crowded together and spoke of his sermon with admiration, and still, as they conversed, the wonder and the admiration increased, so that honest Robin Ruthven's words were not to be listened to. It was in vain that he told them he heard a raven speaking, and another raven answering him. The people laughed him to scorn and kicked him out of their assemblies as one who spoke of evil dignities, and they called him a warlock and a daft body to think and make a language out of the crouping of crows. The sublime preacher could not be heard of, although the country was sought for him, even to the minutest corner of St. Johnston and Dundee. But as he had announced another sermon on the same text on a certain day, all the inhabitants of that populous country, far and near, flocked to the Auchtermuchty. Cupar, Newburgh, and Strathmiglo turned out men, women, and children. Perth and Dundee gave their thousands, and from the east nook of Fife to the foot of the Grampian Hills, there was nothing but running and riding that morning of the Auchtermuchty. The kirk would not hold the 1,000th part of them. A splendid tent was erected on the brae north of the town, and round the countless congregation assembled. When they were all waiting anxiously for the great preacher, behold, Robin Ruthven set up his head in the tent, and warned his countrymen to beware of the doctrines that they were about to hear, for he could prove to their satisfaction that they were all false and tended to their own destruction. The whole multitude raised a cry of indignation against Robin and dragged him from the tent, the elders rebuking him, and the multitude threatening to resort to stronger measures, and though he told them in plain and sophisticated tale of the black Corbys, he was only derided. The great preacher appeared once more, and went through his 2 discourses with increased energy and approbation. All who heard him were amazed, and many of them went into fits, writhing and foaming in a state of the most horrid agitation. Robin Ruthven sat on the outskirts of the great assembly, listening with the rest, and perceived what they, in the height of their enthusiasm, perceived not: the ruinous tendency of the tenet so sublimely inculcated. Robin kenned the voice of his friend the Corby craw again, and was sure he could not be wrong. Say, when public worship was finished, and the elders and the gentry flocked about with the great preacher, as he stood on the green brae in the sight of the hale congregation, and a war alike anxious to pay him some mark of respect. Robin Ruthven came in among the throng to try and effect what he had promised, and with the greatest readiness and simplicity just took on the side of a white gown, and in the sight of a present, held it aside as high as the preacher's knee, and behold, there was a pair of cloven feet. The auld thief was verily catched on the very height of his proud conquest, and put down by an old carle. He could feign no more, but gnashing on Robin with his teeth, he darted to the air like a fiery dragon, and cussed a red rainbow out of the taps of the Lomans. Ah, the old wives and weavers of Auchtermuchty fell down flat with affright, and betook them to their prayers, since again for they saw the dreadful danger they had escaped, and frae that day to this, it is hard matter to gar Auchtermuchty man to listen to a sermon, and harder ane still to gar him up to applauding, for he thinks that he sees the cloven foot peeping out from underneath the ilky sentence. Now this is a true story, my man, quoth the old wife, and whenever you are doubtful of a man, take old Robin Ruthven's plan, and look for the cloven foot, for it's a thing that when we'll hide, and it appears while where's a one to think it. It will keek out the fray aneath the parson's gown, the lawyer's wig, and the Cameroonian's blue bonnet, but it still there is a golden rule whereby to detect it, and that never fails. The old witch didn't give me the rule, and though I had heard it often and often, shame for me and ken what it is. But ye will ken it well, and it would be in thy nae ware of a trial on some of your friends, maybe. For they say there's a certain gentleman seen walking with you a whiles, that wherever he sets his foot, the grass withers as gin it was scoured with a headern. His presence be about us. What's the matter with you, master? Are ye gone to take the calm in the stomach again? The truth is that the clown's absurd story, with a still more ridiculous application, made me sick at heart, a second time. It was not because I thought my illustrious friend was the devil, or that I took a fool's idle tale as counterbalance to divine revelation, that had assured me of my justification in the sight of God before the existence of time, but in short it gave me a view of my own state, at which I shuddered, as indeed I now always did, when the image of my devoted friend and ruler presented itself to my mind. I often communed with my heart on this, and wondered how a connection that had the well-being of mankind solely in view could be productive of fruit so bitter. I then went to try my works by the Saviour's golden rule, as my servant had put it into my head to do, and behold, not one of them would stand the test. I had shed blood on a ground on which I could not admit that any man had a right to shed mine, and I began to doubt the motives of my adviser once more, not that they were intentionally bad, but that this was some great mind led astray by enthusiasm, or some overpowering passion. He seemed to comprehend every one of these motions of my heart, for his manner towards me altered every day. It first became anything but agreeable, then supercilious, and finally intolerable, so that I resolved to shake him off, cost what it would, even though I should be reduced to beg my bread in a foreign land. To do it at home was impossible, as he held my life in his hands, to sell it whenever he had a mind, and besides, his ascendancy over me was as complete as that of a huntsman over his dogs. I was even so weak as the next time I met with him to look steadfastly at his foot, to see if it was not cloven into 2 hoofs. It was the foot of a gentleman, in every respect, so far as appearances went, but the form of his counsels was somewhat equivocal, and if not double, they were amazingly crooked. But if I had taken my measures to abscond and fly from my native place in order to free myself of this tormenting, intolerant, and bloody reformer, he had likewise taken his to expel me, or throw me into the hands of justice. It seems that about this time I was haunted by some spies connected with my late father and brother, of whom the mistress of the former was one. My brother's death had been witnessed by 2 individuals. Indeed, I always had an impression that it was witnessed by more than one, having some faint recollection of hearing voices and challenges close beside me. And this woman had searched about until she found these people, but as I shrewdly suspected, not without the assistance of the only person in my secret, my own warm and devoted friend. I say this because I found that he had them concealed in the neighborhood, and then took me again and again where I was fully exposed to their view without being aware. One time in particular, on pretense of gratifying my revenge on that base woman, he knew so well where she lay concealed that he led me to her and left me to the mercy of two viragos, who had very nigh taken my life. My time of residence at Dowcastle was wearing to a crisis. I could no longer live with my tyrant, who haunted me like my shadow, and besides it seems there were proofs of murder leading against me from all quarters. Of part of these I deemed myself quite free, but the world deemed otherwise, and how the matter would have gone, God only knows. But for the case having undergone a judicial trial, I do not. It perhaps, however, behooves me here to relate all that I know of it, and it is simply this. On the 1st of June, 1712, well may I remember the day, I was sitting locked in my secret chamber, in a state of the utmost despondency, revolving in my mind what I ought to do to be free of my persecutors, and wishing myself a worm or a moth, that I might be crushed and at rest, when behold Samuel entered with eyes like to start out of his head, exclaiming, "For God's sake, master, fly and hide yourself, for your mother's found, and as sure as your living soul, the blame is going to find on you." "My mother found?" said I. "And pray where has she been all this while?" In the meantime I was terribly discomposed of the thoughts of her return. "Been, sir? Been? Why, she's been where you put her. It seems lying buried in the sands of the Lynn. I can tell you will see her as a frightsome figure such I never wish to see again. And the young lady is found too, sir, and it's said the devil—I beg pardon, sir, your friend, I mean. It's said your friend has made the discovery, and the folk are away to raise officers, and they will be here in an hour or two at the farthest. Sir, and say you had not a minute to lose, for there's proof, sir, strong proof, and sworn proof, that ye were last seen with them both. Say, unless ye can give the better an account, or bathe yourself in them, either hide or flee for your bare life." "I will neither hide nor fly," said I, "for I am as guiltless as the blood of these women, as the child unborn." "The country does not think so, master, and I can assure you that you should evidence fail, you run a risk of being torn limb from limb. They are bringing the corpse here, to dare you touch them both before witnesses, and plenty of witnesses there will be." "They shall not bring them here," cried I, shocked beyond measure at the experiment about to be made. "Go instantly and debar them from entering my gate with their bloated and mangled carcasses." "The body of your own mother, sir," said the fellow emphatically. I was in terrible agitation and being driven to my wits' end. I got up and strode furiously round and round the room. Samuel wist not what to do, but I saw by his staring he deemed me doubly guilty. A tap came to the chamber door. We both started like guilty creatures, and as for Samuel, his hair stood all on end with alarm, so that when I motioned to him he could scarcely advance to open the door. He did so at length, and who should enter but my illustrious friend, manifestly in the utmost state of alarm. The moment that Samuel admitted him, the former made his escape by the prince's side as he entered, seemingly in a state of distraction. I was little better when I saw this dreaded personage enter my chamber, which he had never before attempted. And being unable to ask his errand, I suppose I stood and gazed on him like a statue. "I come with sad and tormenting tidings to you, my beloved and ungrateful friend," said he. "But having only a minute left to save your life, I have come to attempt it. There is a mob coming towards you with 2 dead bodies, which will place you in circumstances disagreeable enough. But that is not the worst, for of that you may be able to clear yourself. At this moment there is a party of officers, with a justiciary warrant from Edinburgh, surrounding the house, and about to begin the search of it for you. If you fall into their hands, you are inevitably lost, for I have been making earnest inquiries, and finding that everything is entrained for your ruin." And who has been the cause of all this?" said I, with great bitterness. But he stopped me short, adding, "There is no time for such reflections at present. I give you my word of honor that your life should be safe from the hand of man. So it shall, if the power remain with me to save it. I come to redeem my pledge, and to save your life by the sacrifice of my own. Here, not one word of expostulation. Change habits with me, and you may then pass by the officers and guards, and even through the approaching mob, with the most perfect temerity. There is a virtue in this garb, and instead of offering to detain you, they shall pay you obeisance. Make haste and leave this place for the present, flying where you best may, and if I escape from these dangers that surround me, I will endeavor to find you out, and bring you what intelligence I am able." I put on his green frock coat, buff belt, and a sort of turban that he always wore on his head, somewhat resembling a bishop's mitre. He drew his hand thrice across my face, and I withdrew as he continued to urge me. My hall door and postern gate were both strongly guarded, and there were sundry armed people within, searching the closets, but all of them made way for me and lifted their caps as I passed by them. Only one superior officer accosted me, asking if I had seen the culprit. I knew not what answer to make, but chanced to say with great truth and propriety, "He is safe enough." The man beckoned with a smile, as much as to say, "Thank you, sir, that is quite sufficient," and I walked deliberately away. I had not well left the gate, till hearing a great noise coming from the deep glen towards the east, I turned that way, deeming myself quite secure in this my new disguise, to see what it was, and if matters were as had been described to me. There I met a great mob, sure enough coming with 2 dead bodies, stretched on boards, and decently covered with white sheets. I would fain have examined their appearance, had I not perceived that the apparent fury in the looks of the men, and judged from that how far much safe it was for me not to intermeddle in the affray. I cannot tell how it was, but I felt a strange and unwonted delight in viewing this scene, and a certain pride of heart in being supposed the perpetrator of unnatural crimes laid to my charge. This was a feeling quite new to me, and if there were virtues in the robes of the illustrious foreigner, who had without all dispute preserved my life at this time, I say, if there was any inherent virtue in these robes of his, as he had suggested, this was one of their effects, that they turned my heart towards that which was evil, horrible, and disgustful. I mixed with the mob to hear what they were saying. Every tongue was engaged in loading me with the most opprobrious epithets. One called me a monster of nature, another an incarnate devil, and another a creature made to be cursed in time and eternity. I retired from them and winded my way southward, comforting myself with the assurance that so mankind had used and persecuted the greatest fathers and apostles of the Christian Church, and that their vile opprobrium could not alter the counsels of heaven concerning me. On going over that rising ground called Dorrington Moor, I could not help turning round and taking a look at Dowcastle. I had little doubt that it would be my last look, and nearly as little ambition that it should not. I thought how high my hopes of happiness and advancement had been on entering that mansion and taking possession of its rich and extensive domains, and how miserably I had been disappointed. On the contrary, I had experienced nothing but chagrin, disgust, and terror, and I now consoled myself with the hope that I should henceforth shake myself free of the chains of my great tormentor, and for that privilege was I willing to encounter any earthly distress. I could not help perceiving that I was now on a path which was likely to lead me into a species of distress hitherto unknown, and hardly dreamed of by me, that was total destitution. For all the riches I had been possessed of a few hours previous to this, I found that here I was turned out of my lordly possessions without a single merk, or the power of lifting and commanding the smallest sum without being thereby discovered and seized. Had it been possible for me to have escaped in my own clothes, I had a considerable sum secreted in these, but by the sudden change I was left without a coin for present necessity. But I had a hope in heaven, knowing that the just man would not be left destitute, and that though many troubles surrounded him, he would at last be set free from them all. I was possessed of strong and brilliant parts, and a liberal education, and though I had somehow unaccountably suffered my theological qualifications to fall into destitute since my acquaintance with the ablest and most rigid of all theologians, I had nevertheless hopes that by preaching up redemption, by grace, preordination, and eternal purpose, I should yet be enabled to benefit mankind in some country, and rise to high distinction. These are some of the thoughts by which I consoled myself as I posted on my way southward, avoiding the towns and villages and falling into the crossways that led from each of the great roads passing east and west to another. This is the end of Part 8 of Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. Thank you for listening.